Hello. Today we are going to talk about tissues. There's a lot of different types of tissues found throughout the body, and we're going to kind of get an introduction today to all of these different types of tissues and talk about where where some of these tissues are actually located within the body. So, a tissue is considered a group of cells. These group of cells are all going to come from the same type of tissue during development, during that embryologic development inside of the mother's womb. And all of these specific types of tissues are going to carry out different types of activities. Like some tissues are what make your saliva in your mouth. Some tissues make the digestive juices that help you break down different foods in your stomach and your digestive tract. Your skin is considered a tissue. It protects you from everything outside of you, outside the body. So someone who studies tissues studies histology. So this is what we're looking at is the histology. We're going to talk about histology in every chapter through Anatomy 1 here, as well as Anatomy 2. Then somebody who studies these tissues is a pathologist. So there's 4 types of tissues found throughout the entire body. We have our epithelial tissues. These epithelial tissues, again, this makes up your skin, so it covers your body. It's going to line every hollow organ. So your mouth, the esophagus that food travels down, your stomach, all of your intestines, your bladder. It lines the uterus in the female. So we find these tissues all over the body. Underneath these epithelial tissues, we usually find some sort of connective tissue. This is a different type of tissue, but it's made to protect as well. It supports. So we have connective tissue found underneath our skin. So it's kind of helping to bind your skin to the underlying tissues even. It binds organs together. So think in your stomach, all of those different organs are held together in place by connective tissue. Muscle tissue. I'm sure when you think of muscle tissue, you think of the muscles that help you move. Those are your skeletal muscle. That's a specific type of muscular tissue. We have cardiac muscle tissue. Your heart. These are different types of tissues than your skeletal muscle because they have a different function. And then there's nervous tissue. Your brain. All the nerves in your body that travel different places, that allow you to feel, that allow you to touch different things. It sends information to and from the brain. These are all through electrical signals. These are all different things that we're going to introduce today. And as we go through all of the different systems, we'll come back to these types of tissues again and look more specifically at how they work. So our epithelial tissues, this is just one type of epithelial tissue here. We're going to go into more details about all the different shapes of the cells. Our connective tissue. Our connective tissue has lots of different cells together in one area, including the one blood vessel we can see going through here. This is a big blood vessel. We have some immune cells. We have our immune system found usually in connective tissue. We have adipose cells, those fat cells. That stores, they're storage sites, really. Muscle tissue. This is skeletal muscle specifically. This drawing right here. And then we have nervous tissue. Nervous tissue is made up of lots of different types of cells. We're going to just go through the main type of nervous tissue today. And then when we get to the nervous system, we'll go into what each of these other little cells are. So when we're talking about tissues, there's different ways that each of these tissues are held together. We look back up at this epithelial tissue. Each of these cells needs to be held together somehow, so they stay in place. So that's where we get either cell junctions or tight junctions. It's kind of helping to hold these cells together in one way or another. So we're going to go through all of these different types of cell junctions and where they're located. And then we'll go through some of these different tight junctions, because these tight junctions are going to prevent substances from going between cells. And we need that in certain places in our body. So in a tight junction, we look at these different cells. These are two different cells, just the walls of the cells, of two cells that come together, and how they're being held together. If we remember from chapter 3, those transmembrane proteins, these transmembrane proteins are working to help hold these cells together so something cannot pass all the way through. That can't happen. In tight junctions, we're preventing stuff from passing through these cells. Between these cells, I should say. Not through the middle of the cells, but between the cells. So another type we have is adhering junctions. Again, with adhering junctions, we've got proteins in that plasma membrane. So we've got two cells coming together, and these adhering junctions, or these proteins, again, are helping to attach those two membranes together. But this time they're using those microfilaments that are found inside of those cells that we saw from chapter 3. We're using these microfilaments to help hold on both sides. Here. On both sides, we're using, these are microfilaments here that are helping to hold these transmembrane proteins right here in the middle in place. These transmembrane proteins are known as cadherins in these adhering junctions. And again, we have this adhesion belt with microfilaments on the other side. As you can kind of notice, there's a little bit of space between between both of these cells. This is going to allow for passage of some material between these two cells. Unlike these tight junctions where they're holding the cells together so tightly, adhering junctions will actually allow certain substances to pass through these spaces. The next type we have are desmosomes. Desmosomes, let's look at it, the picture, because then you can get a better idea. We've got those transmembrane proteins again, those glycoproteins. They're known as cadherins. Instead of those, let's see here, microfilaments on those adhering junctions, this time we've got intermediate filaments, or keratin. This is not going to be the first, you'll hear this word again in chapter 5. Because chapter 5 is our first system we cover, the integumentary system. This is what holds the cells in your skin together. It's also found in cardiac cells. But these desmosomes, this keratin that's helping to hold these proteins in place, they prevent these cells from being pulled apart. If you notice your skin, you can't just take your skin and spread it and break the cells apart. That's because of these desmosomes. They're helping to hold these cells in place. These cells are stable because of these desmosomes. We also have hemidesmosomes. The difference between desmosomes that are holding two cells in place, these two different cells together right here, in a hemidesmosome, they are holding cells down to this basement membrane. So that very bottom layer of cells are being held to that bottom with hemidesmosomes. Hemi is telling us there's just one. There's one desmosome at the bottom that's holding the cell down versus desmosomes. We see these on both sides of the cells. So there's going to be one on this side of the cell, and then if we were go over to the other side of the cell and look, we'd see the same exact thing, holding that cell to the cell next to it. So here we're just holding the cells down to that basement membrane, that bottom layer of tissue. It's still the same idea. We still have those transmembrane proteins helping to hold everything in place. We have these intermediate filaments that are made of keratin, which is a type of protein, helping to hold these cells down to the basement membrane. So again, that keratin, which is found in our skin, they're helping to hold that cell down. Gap junctions, another type of junction that's holding cells together. We have proteins again. This time they're called connexins. And what they're doing is they're forming fluid tunnels. So let's look at this. We've got a gap junction here. And as you can see, we've got these little tunnels between the cells. This allows these cells to share information, share energy, share ions. This is allowing material to pass, or information even, to pass from one cell to the next cell. These gap junctions are found in muscles, cardiac muscles specifically. They allow nerves to communicate with each other very fast. This is how information goes from one cell to the next cell very rapidly. We're using gap junctions, or these little tiny tunnels, to send this information. So that's how all of our different cells are held together. Let's look at the different types of tissue in more detail. I mentioned the 4 different types of tissue. Now we're going to go into the cells that are found, the shape of the cells, layers of the cells, their functions, and what all they do. So let's start with epithelial tissue. Epithelial tissue, if you kind of look at your hand, the back of your hand, your skin, they are found in continuous sheets of cells. So the back of your hand is one big continuous sheet of cells. They can be one layer of cells, or there can be many layers of cells. We have surface epithelium, that's your skin. That's what you were just looking at the back of your hand. It can line internal organs. It can line internal structures. Your blood vessels, the inside of your blood vessels are lined with epithelium. Your respiratory, digestive, urinary system, and even the genital system is all lined with epithelial cells. We also have what is known as glandular epithelium. Think of your sweat glands. Where you sweat is made, that's glandular epithelium. We have our salivary glands. That's glandular epithelium. Your thyroid gland, this is a gland that's found in your neck. This makes a hormone that regulates your metabolism. Those digestive glands, so these different glands that are making those digestive juices that break down the food that you eat so we're able to absorb it. So all epithelial cells have four main jobs. They're going to protect, they're going to secrete, they're going to absorb, and or excrete. So all of your epithelial cells found throughout your body are going to do at least one of these, usually more than one. So apical surface. So this is what faces that body surface. We have a lateral surface of our cells. These are cells that face each other. We have that basal surface, which is the bottom layer, or the bottom, either the bottom of the cell or the bottom layer. And then we have that basement membrane. So if I draw a little epithelial cell here, there's my nucleus. This is my apical. This is my lateral. This is my other lateral. My basal. And then underneath that basal layer, that basal side, which is just the bottom of the cell, is my basement membrane. That's all this slide is saying. Is the apical is that top surface, the basal is the bottom, the lateral is the sides that are connecting together somehow, and then that basement membrane that bottom layer usually attaches to. Within these epithelial cells, we have the basal lamina. We have a reticular lamina. That basal lamina is made by epithelial cells. This is like the bottom of those epithelial cells. The reticular lamina is closer to that connective tissue that sits underneath. So fibroblasts, we'll see this in connective tissue. Fibroblasts are cells that make connective tissue. I'll say it now, and I'll say it probably several more times this semester. When you see the word blast, blast means we're building something. So a fibroblast means we're building that connective tissue. Here's some interesting, just little facts. Epithelial cells, they do have nerve supply. That's what allows you when something or somebody touches your skin or you touch something, you can feel it. It's avascular. Avascular, there's no blood supply. That's what that means. A means no. You'll see A in other areas of the body, like when you can't smell, you can't see, you can't hear, you can't taste. They usually start that with the letter with A. And then the second part of the word is going to tell you what it is. A, vascular, vascular vessels, blood supply. So all epithelial cells are going to get nutrients through diffusion from that connective tissue specifically. Your epithelial cells They have a very high rate of cell division. Because think, looking at the back of your hand again, or your hand, arm, leg, wherever you're looking, you're constantly losing cells. You lose millions of cells a day off of your skin. They are sloughing off. Every time you put clothes on, you're sloughing off some cells. Anytime something brushes up against your skin, you're sloughing off cells. So these cells need to be able to replace themselves very quickly. So they renew very well. They repair very well. This is important when we get into some other areas. I think it's when we get to the integumentary system, we start talking about tissue repair in more detail. But epithelial cells can replace themselves 100%. When epithelial cells fall off or get damaged and it's just the epithelial cells that get damaged, they can replace themselves 100%. I'll mention it now, and just so if you have any scars anywhere on your body, any scars that were formed means you went below that epithelial cells. You went to the connective tissue underneath it, and that's what caused that scar to form. Scars form in connective tissue, not in epithelial tissue. So here are some words. They're going to come back over this semester and next semester. So it's kind of good to learn it now. So when you hear these words later, you remember what they mean. These first 4 chapters, there's information that's going to keep coming back over and over again. So it's good to learn these 4 chapters because otherwise you're not having to constantly go back and look something up. But by having to constantly go back and look something up anyways, you're going to learn it eventually. So the way cells are arranged, we have simple. Simple means a single layer of cells. There's just one layer of cells. So I have a cell, a cell, a cell, 4 cells here, say next to each other, get their nucleus going. This is a single layer of cells, so it's simple epithelium. Here when we have simple epithelium, it's used for diffusion. In your lungs, we have a single layer of cells. Between the blood vessels in the lungs and where the air that we breathe into the lungs goes, so we can take the oxygen out of the air we breathe into the blood supply. That's all done through diffusion. They can secrete. Think about when you've had a cold and you get a lot of mucus buildup in your nose or even into the back of your throat, you coughing up mucus. There are cells specifically designed to make that mucus that's causing that to happen. They also absorb your digestive tract. You need to be able to absorb the nutrients out of the food that you eat. Otherwise, you won't survive. We have cells that are known as pseudo-stratified. Pseudo means false. So when we come across this pseudo-stratified, it looks like it's multiple layers. Here's the interesting part of it. All cells start from that basement membrane, but not all of the cells are going to reach the top. So let's see here. There's my basement membrane. I have some cells that are going to reach the top, one that may come halfway up, another one that goes up to the top, another one that goes further up, but not all the way, another one that goes all the way up to the top. And then they have their nucleus. So the nucleus are not lined up. A lot of these cells contain cilia. So they have those little finger-like hairs coming off the top. Or they're going to secrete out mucus. Mucus cells are called goblet cells. I'll come back to that. We'll see that again later. And then our last type of arrangement of our epithelial cells are going to be stratified epithelium. Stratified is going to mean more than one. So we have 2 or more layers when we're talking about stratified. Your skin, your mouth. Those are stratified tissues because they go through a lot of wear and tear. Just your clothes on your skin is brushing cells off. So that's going through wear and tear. Every time you eat something, the food in your mouth is brushing up against the sides of your insides of your cheeks. That's going through wear and tear. So stratified, we get this layer of cells, but then we have another layer, and usually another layer, and like another layer even. So there's lots of layers of cells here. Can be sometimes they can be just 2 layers, but it has to be more than 1 layer, so 2 or more to be that stratified. And then we have our shapes. Some of these shapes make sense. Some of them don't. Their names don't always make sense. Squamous. Squamous does mean flat. So squamous cells, you know what? Instead of drawing these, let's look here. This is a better than my drawings by far. So the squamous down here, these are flat cells. We have cuboidal. Cuboidal because they are cube shaped. Did that make sense? The other one, columnar. Columnar because they are tall columns. Then back up to these arrangements, much better done than mine. Simple is that single layer of cells. So that one layer. Pseudostratified, all of these cells do touch this basement membrane, but you see not all of them are going to reach that top. And then that last one, that's stratified. This is showing 4 layers of cells. It can be many more than that. It can be hundreds of layers. Maybe not hundreds, but pretty close. Or your skin gets close. But it's just many layers for stratified. So here's kind of how we name these. This picture here is showing those squamous. So we'd put simple, because it's 1 layer, squamous. These are kind of cube shaped. When we are looking at cells that are stratified, we are looking at the very top layer to see the shape of the cells. I will show several examples through this PowerPoint on why we do that, but we always label stratified cells by their top layer. So this picture would be stratified cuboidal. Most of the cells on this pseudostratified layer, this false stratified, are columnar. So we would call this pseudostratified columnar epithelium. I think there was another type of cell here that's not shown in these pictures. The last one that's listed here that's not shown in the picture, which we'll get to when we go through the more details shortly, is transitional. Transitional cells, transitional epithelium is only found in the urinary system. It can also be called urothelium. When you get to Anatomy 2, to the urinary system, the textbook likes to refer to it as urothelium. And then it'll also say transitional. The reason why is because these cells can change shape. They can stretch and go back to their normal size. So this is an example. This lines your bladder. The inside of your bladder is lined with these transitional cells. So as your bladder fills with urine and it starts to stretch, these cells allow your bladder to stretch to fill with urine until you go to or go void. So these are all the different types of surface epithelium. This is the ones we're starting with, the surface epithelium. And we're going to go through pictures of these, where they're at, and what their roles are for all of these different types of epithelium. You can see all the different types of simple epithelium and all the different types of stratified epithelium. So let's start with our simple squamous. That simple squamous, again, simple means it's a single layer of flat cells. I kind of like how it says it resembles tiled floor. If that gives you a good visual of what you're looking at, then great. We are going to see these. Again, you might find some in the heart. The inside of your blood vessels, that lines the inside, we're going to have here. Lymphatic vessels. These are other vessels that work with the immune system. When you get to the lymphatic system in chapter or in Anatomy 2, you'll go into more details about this type of tissue. These are known as endothelium because they're lining inside. Endo is within. We have mesothelium. Meso is middle. So we find these in those little tiny air sacs in your lungs. This type of tissue is where our kidneys are filtering the waste products out of our blood, because our kidneys' main role is to clean your blood of waste, and it forms that urine. So in our kidneys, we're going to find this where we're filtering out waste products. The cornea. So that's in your eye. Then your eardrum. That tympanic membrane is the other name for it. We're going to see this single layer of cells. So these are examples that filters. So those kidneys that are cleaning your blood. Diffusion, your lungs, where when we breathe in air, we're taking oxygen out of the air into our blood, and then we're taking carbon dioxide that from our blood, and that's what we breathe out. So this simple squamous, this flat layer of cells here in this picture, that's weird. right there. Here's another example. We're looking from the side. This one, the top picture, we are looking down. And this picture is from the side. So here's this single layer of cells. Next one. So I can enlarge it here. Simple cuboidal epithelium. Simple, that single layer. Cuboidal, so we have cube-shaped cells. If we look at this picture, you can kind of notice all of these nuclei, these darker purple within these cells. This entire circle here is made of cuboidal cells, these cube-shaped cells. If you're looking at them from the side, they're going to be kind of more square shaped. They have a pretty large nucleus, and all the nuclei line up as you go around. So the nuclei is going to be, the nucleus is centrally located. Okay, where do we find these? In females, it's on the ovaries. The lens of your eye. So the lens is where you focus light into the back of your eye so you can see. So part of that retina, the back of your eye, that retina. In your kidneys, again, there's areas that are lined with this simple cuboidal. The thyroid gland, this picture is part of the, or no, this is the kidneys. I was about to say, it looks kind of like the thyroid gland, but the cells around it make it look different. But this is a picture from inside of the kidney. In lab, we will look at some thyroid gland as well. And in the pancreas. The pancreas is a digestive organ, endocrine, and exocrine. Exocrine means it makes something that goes outside of the blood supply. Endocrine goes into the blood supply. Pancreas makes insulin that maintains your blood sugar levels, but it also makes digestive juices that helps you break down food. So simple cuboidal is used for secretion and absorption. So say in your kidneys, that's where this picture is from. From here, we could be taking some materials, taking some ions. We've talked about sodium. Taking sodium that's in this area here, in this opening, this lumen, and taking sodium back into the blood supply. So we're absorbing or reabsorbing. We could be taking potassium out of that blood supply and putting it into that urine we are forming. So we're secreting, we're getting rid of something, or we're taking something in. That's where we're going to find this simple cuboidal epithelium, this single layer of cubed cells. Next one. This is where names start to get more confusing. We have non-ciliated simple columnar epithelium. So Simple, that single layer. Columnar, column-like cells. It's non-ciliated. Cilia are a lot longer processes that come off. So here we have microvilli. Microvilli are very short, those little very short processes that come off. Microvilli are used to increase absorption, the rate of absorption, and it's also going to increase that surface area for absorption on that cell. Let's look at the drawing first. These kind of cream colored cells, I'd say, those are mucus cells. Those mucus cells are called goblet cells. So in your digestive tract is where this is where we find this tissue specific as an example. But we've got goblet cells that are making mucus to secrete into your digestive tract to help move things along. So those goblet cells, they secrete out that mucus. That mucus is going to work to, that mucus is going to secrete out to the top surface, and then it's going to help kind of lubricate your intestines. So we find this non-ciliated, simple columnar epithelium in your digestive canal. So all the way from your stomach to your anus. So your stomach, your small intestine, your large intestine, all the way down to the anus. The gallbladder. The gallbladder is a storage site. It stores bile made by the liver that helps to break down fats. And then we also will see this in different glands. So its main role is secretion and absorption. If it's in the digestive tract, which means we're absorbing nutrients from food that we eat, it's secreting because all of these goblet cells that are making mucus. So let's look here. This is that non-ciliated simple columnar epithelium. Some things I want to point out. On this non-ciliated simple columnar epithelium, all of these nuclei, they line up very well. They're in a pretty much in a straight line. You're going to see that with this simple columnar epithelium. All the nuclei are going to line up. Then we're also going to see what makes it the non-ciliated is we have this little teeny tiny brush border here. These kind of white cells, and I'm coloring in pink. Those are those goblet cells. This is a really good and very enlarged goblet cell over here to the right. Those cells are making that mucus that they release out into that digestive tract to help lubricate. So let's look at the next one. This one is the ciliated simple columnar epithelium. Again, simple, single layer. Columnar, column-like cells. Except for this time it is ciliated. So let's look at this picture down here for a second. The picture before had microvilli. You can see the difference. The cilia is a lot longer. Cilia's job is to move things. So we've got this in our bronchioles, which is in our lungs. They're small tubes, part of that respiratory tract. The uterine tube, which is what this picture is from. This is the tube that connects the ovaries to the uterus. We have this in the uterus even. Our sinuses. This is in our skull. The ventricles of our brain and our spinal cord. So again, the nuclei, they still line up pretty well in a single file line. We have these very long processes coming off. There's still these areas that are kind of white down here. That's still mucus. So we still have those goblet cells found throughout here. But again, we are moving things when we see ciliated simple columnar epithelium. Because in your respiratory tract, if you've ever, again, back to when you had a cold, you cough up some mucus. This cilia is lining your respiratory tract to help move that mucus and foreign particles towards your throat. It pushes it up towards the back of your throat till it hits that specific area that's going to trigger you to cough. In these uterine tubes, so after that oocyte or egg gets released by the ovary, it gets taken up into this uterine tube and it needs to travel down to the uterus. So it's taken by this ovary into the uterine tube and down. Well, the cilia is taking that ovary and it is pushing it towards that uterus. It is helping to move it along. So we're going to see this type of tissue in areas where we need to move something across the cell's surface. Okay, next, non-ciliated pseudostratified columnar epithelium. Again, that pseudostratified means it's false. It's really only one layer of cells, but it looks like it's many. So, as it says here, it appears to have several layers. And that is because these nuclei are not nicely lined up like they are in the simple columnar. But there's very few places that we're going to have stratified columnar, that more than one layer of columnar cells. The male reproductive tract, you'll see it. That's about it. So unless you're looking at the male reproductive tract, you may be looking at non-ciliated pseudostratified columnar epithelium. So that epididymis, that male reproductive tract, some glands, and that part of that male urethra. We're even going to see some of this non-ciliated pseudostratified columnar. Again, we absorb and we secrete. This one isn't very common, so it's more just kind of mentioning it. You're not going to have to identify this one in lab. This is the one that you'd have to identify if it was given to you, is that ciliated pseudostratified columnar epithelium. Again, it's pseudostratified, so it appears to have several layers, but it's not. All cells attached to that basement membrane, but not all cells reach the top. There's going to be goblet cells, those mucus cells. They're ciliated, so we're going to have those long cilia on top. Where we see this, that upper respiratory tract. This is coming out of this trachea. This is the tube that takes the air that you breathe in down to your lungs. So as I had mentioned before, that cilia is moving things. So the mucus cells, all of these white cells area here, this is all making mucus. This mucus is being let out onto the surface of the cells. It's used to trap foreign particles. So when you breathe in, there's always going to be some kind of particles, microbes, pathogens, viruses, whatever you're breathing in. We've got different defense mechanisms to try to prevent you from getting sick. This is one of them. Say you breathe in a virus. As it's traveling down, first it has to make it into the trachea. It's hard to get to that point, but if it makes it into that trachea, it can get caught in that mucus. So that mucus kind of takes in that virus, and now it's just moving it up. That cilia beats it up to the back of your throat, causes you to cough. You spit it out, or you swallow it down. If you swallow it down, it goes into your stomach. It's so acidic in your stomach that it's going to kill it. So, but again, that main role of that cilia is to move something. Okay, let's go to stratified. Those are all the different kinds of simple. Now we're going into stratified. So stratified squamous epithelium. Stratified means it has 2 or more layers of cells. It could be several layers deep. And let's look. We've got a drawing and we've got a slide here. Let's look at the drawing first. We name these stratified cells by that top layer. If I were to name this from the bottom layer, all the way down here, this very bottom layer would tell me to call this cuboidal. They're kind of a cube shaped. But as they work their way up to the top, they flatten out. So this top layer is these flat cells. This top layer of flat cells is what gives it its name. Stratified because we have all of these layers of cells here. So there's lots of layers. That top layer is squamous. So we have stratified squamous. This picture over here, this is the lining of the vagina. We have this part here showing all of these different layers of cells here. We look at this very top layer to see that these cells are flat. They're pretty flat overall. So that is telling me that I have many, many, many layers, so it's stratified. I have flat cells, so it's squamous. This is one type of stratified squamous. These are non-keratinized cells. Technically, keratin is a protein. We have this protein and make this protein in our skin that lines the outside of your body. So this keratinized stratified squamous epithelium, it's going to be on your skin. That keratin is that protein. It's going to help protect your skin. It protects the tissues underneath from heat, any kind of microbes, and different chemicals. You're touching different things all day long. There's all kinds of chemicals that you're touching that you don't always realize. Your skin protects you from that. This keratin protects you from that. In this picture, it shows the vagina, and in the vagina, we have non-keratinized stratified squamous epithelium. Because we don't need to protect some areas from wear and tear that our skin gets. So the keratinized makes up that skin. Non-keratinized is usually going to line wet surfaces like the inside of your mouth, your esophagus. These are more wet areas. The epiglottis is a structure that moves up and down and covers the trachea. When it goes down, it's covering the trachea. So when you swallow food or water, it'll go into the esophagus, not down into the lungs. The pharynx, the vagina, and even your tongue is covered in this non-keratinized stratified squamous. Again, it's protecting you from abrasion. It's also protecting you from water loss. When we get to the skin, the integumentary system, next chapter, we'll go into how we're protecting from water loss. Ultraviolet radiation. And with your immune system, it is considered the first line of defense. It protects from different pathogens and microbes. So this next picture, we have stratified cuboidal epithelium. Again, stratified has 2 or more layers, and it's fairly rare. Here's the secret. It's not necessarily a secret, but a lot of people don't always mention it. That stratified cuboidal. Stratified cuboidal is you're not gonna find with more than 2 layers. You're only gonna find stratified cuboidal will only have 2 layers. This will help you identify stratified cuboidal versus something else, which I will show you when we get to it. So, sweat glands are going to have these 2 layers of cells. Esophageal glands are helping things travel down that esophagus, and then in the male urethra. So, this drawing, we have these 2 layers of cells. This top layer, this bottom layer. They are both layers in this case are going to be cube shaped, just like in this picture. This isn't the best example of stratified cuboidal. Stratified cuboidal, it's hard to see those 2 layers. If you get really close up, you can kind of see these 2 layers of cells here and another layer on top. But it's not as easy to see in this picture. This isn't the best example of it. And it's pretty rare, so it's not one that you're going to have to identify, but it can help you distinguish between stratified cuboidal and something else, which is why you needed to see this to understand, because we will actually mention this again when we talk about sweat glands. Another fairly rare type of tissue is stratified columnar epithelium. Again, we name our cells by the top layer. So if we look, that bottom layer may look more cube shaped. It's this top layer that has that column shape to it. That is what gives it that stratified columnar. So here's this example. You can kind of see where these 2 layers of cells divide off. And all of these nuclei, again, are lined up on that top layer at least. So you're going to see a full line of nuclei lined up. Well, it's not in other places. So part of the urethra, again, some glands, those ducts of glands, the conjunctiva of your eye. Again, it's pretty uncommon. So it's not one that you're going to have to identify for lab, but you kind of need to know it exists because it'll be mentioned again in anatomy too. More than one layer means it's going to protect. It can also secrete stuff out. Okay, this is why I've said that stratified cuboidal is only 2 layers. This is that urothelium or transitional epithelium that I had mentioned. If we look down here, let's look at the drawing first. This top layer of cells kind of looks like it's cube-shaped, but there's many, many layers of it. Here, this drawing, you can't really make out what shape these cells even are. There's just lots of nuclei and you see like lighter pink all around it. It's kind of hard to distinguish what some of this is. If you go in even further, like zoom in further, you can start to see these different shapes more. This line's the bladder. The ureters. This is what takes the urine formed by the kidneys down to the bladder. And then even part of the urethra, like the beginning of the urethra, is made of this transitional epithelium. So if we look at this picture, this is a relaxed picture. These tissues are not stretched out at all. Now we can stretch them. It shows how this tissues flatten out. They change shape as that bladder fills. That's what makes this urothelium or transitional epithelium special. It's the only type of epithelial cells that can stretch. Other types of epithelial cells don't stretch so well. And again, it may look like more than 2 layers of those cuboidal cells. So if you see a picture that has more than 2 layers of cuboidal cells, it could very well be this transitional epithelium because you will not see that stratified cuboidal with more than two layers. So that's how, like, that's the main way to tell the difference between those two. So let's look at glands. I mentioned glands a little bit. I mentioned endocrine and exocrine. So here's where we see those words. Endocrine is hormones. And these hormones are being secreted directly into the bloodstream. An exocrine gland, their product that they are secreting out will go anywhere but the bloodstream. So they can go under the surface of the skin. They can go into the lumen of hollow organs, like your stomach, your digestive tract, the respiratory tract, those mucus cells, those are exocrine glands. So we had already mentioned those unicellular, because we mentioned those goblet cells. It's a single cell that secretes out their substance. We're going to look at some of these multicellular. So many cells, like your salivary glands, your sweat glands. So here's that single layer of cells. Here's that thyroid gland I was showing you, I was talking about earlier. And we'll also look at this in lab. This is an endocrine gland. It secretes out thyroid hormone that regulates your metabolism, your body temperature. This is just one example. This is a single layer of cells that's making its substance and secreting it into the bloodstream. We'll talk about a couple different endocrine glands. We'll talk about the pineal gland before the end of the semester. We'll talk about, maybe we'll mention the pituitary gland when we get to the brain. These are both in the brain. But the rest of them will be talked about in Anatomy 2 in that endocrine chapter, chapter 18. Exocrine. Here's those stratified cuboidal cells. They are those exocrine glands, and they are secreting their substance to the skin surface, into the lumen of your digestive tract, your stomach, hollow organs, hollow cavities. Exocrine glands usually have those 2 layers of cuboidal cells. So like your sweat glands, oil glands. We have oil glands that are attached to every single hair in your body. That's why you go a couple days without washing your hair gets really oily. It's because we have oil glands attached to it. Earwax or cerumen is the medical term for it. Earwax produces that wax that goes into your ears, those digestive glands, salivary glands, even parts of the pancreas. Exocrine glands, well, when you sweat, it lowers your body temperature. Oil, earwax, saliva, digestive enzymes. These exocrine glands, we'll mention some of these in Anatomy 1, some of these in Anatomy 2. So these are things, again, that are going to come back to you. Our exocrine glands are named based off of their shape. I like pictures because pictures make it a lot easier to understand because there's lots of names. So we have simple tubular. This simple means there's only one, and it's kind of a little tube shaped. Simple branched tubular starts from one, and then it branches into more than one. Simple coiled tubular. Simple, there's only one. It's coiled shaped, and it's tubed. Acinar means it has that rounded at the bottom. That's what acinar is. So simple acinar is one opening or one branch to it, and it's more rounded at the bottom. We have simple branched acinar. Comes into one with that more rounded bottom to it. We have compound tubular. Compound, so there's a branch over here, there's a branch here, there's a branch here. Compound, there's more than one branch to it that's going to branch out from there even. It's tubular because they're tubes. They're longer, just long tubes to it. We have compound acinar. So there's a branch, there's a branch, there's a branch, and then those branch into those semicircular kind of bottoms. And then we have compound tubuloacinar. Yes. We're not going to, most of this is to kind of give you an idea of the shape. When you see them, you kind of understand. But we have these throughout different areas in the body, like large intestine, gastric glands, sweat glands, glands of the male urethra, sebaceous glands. Those are those oil glands that are attached to your hair. Bulbourethral glands, those are in the male reproductive system. Mammary glands in the breast. And then these acinar cells of the pancreas. So we see these in all different areas throughout the body. So let's look at some of these exocrine glands as well. We have merocrine glands. Merocrine is most of the glands in your body, your salivary glands, your glands in your pancreas. And what we're doing in merocrine glands, these secretions that are being formed, they're kind of processed, packaged with proteins. They're matured in that Golgi complex. And then they're put into those vesicles at that Golgi complex that releases these out through exocytosis. So those cells that are making their substance, those little glands, those little vesicles that are going to attach to the surface, release their substances out. Those are merocrine. Apocrine. I have a picture of these. Yes. That merocrine. Okay. I like pictures. So that rough endoplasmic reticulum is making those proteins that are going to that Golgi complex. They're being packaged and processed, put into these secretory vesicles, and then they're releasing out their substances out to the cell. Those are that merocrine that I mentioned. Apocrine. Apocrine, they're making their substances, they're packaging them and processing them in that Golgi complex, putting them into those secretory vesicles. But apocrine, that entire top portion of that cell is pinched off. So it pinches off the top of its cell every time before it releases off its secretions. Holocrine. Here's a difference with holocrine, because these cells, they make their substance, and then the entire cell kind of bursts open, which is why we've got new cells that need to be formed underneath, because as these cells release their substance, we need a cell to replace it. Those sebaceous glands, those oil glands in your skin, in your hair, that's where we find those holocrine glands. Connective tissue, the next type of tissue. There's a lot of different types of connective tissue out there, and I'm going to try to do my best to point out the differences between each of them to help you identify each one and where they're found. So, in connective tissue, we have extracellular matrix. This is just everything that's found between all the cells. We have those fibroblasts that I mentioned before. Fibroblasts are the cells that usually make connective tissue. Macrophages, these are your immune cells. So phagocytes are cells that are going to take in foreign substances inside of that cell, and then they're going to help to break them down. And then we have plasmocytes. These cells, again, they're part of that immune system. They kind of just hang out in your digestive tract, or in, yeah, mostly your digestive and respiratory tract. We also have mast cells. These mast cells, in an inflammatory response, they're going to secrete out substances that cause that reddening, causes blood to come to the area, causes more immune cells to come to the area. They cause your body's reaction, but they also can take in and kill bacteria. So they're still part of that immune system. Adipocytes. Adipose cells are your fat cells. These store Mostly triglycerides. They do store other substances, other fat-soluble type substances, fat-soluble vitamins, fat-soluble medications can be stored in there. If it's at too high of numbers. Any extra carbohydrates, proteins that you're taking that your body doesn't need gets converted to fats and moved to your fat cells. Leukocytes. Again, another type of immune cell. Allergic responses, those leukocytes are responding. Parasitic invasions, those leukocytes are responding. So these are all different cells that are going to be found in connective tissue. So there's lots of different cells here. Depending on where this connective tissue is found is going to determine the type of ground substance. Hyaluronic acid. It's more slippery. So it's going to lubricate your joints so your joints move smoothly. It also works to maintain the shape of your eyeball. So your eyeball stays that kind of oval round shape, not flattens out, goes different directions. Chondroitin sulfate. Cartilage, bone, skin, blood vessels. Dermatin sulfate. So your skin, dermatin, blood vessels, your heart valves. Keratin sulfate. Bone, cartilage, and the cornea of your eye. So again, the different types of fibers we're going to see. We have collagen fibers. Collagen fibers are extremely strong. So any kind of pulling or stretching on those tissues, it's going to help to resist that. It allows for those tissues to move without tearing. We're going to have elastic fibers. These elastic fibers have a protein called elastin, and it allows the tissues to stretch. Tissues that have a large amounts of elastic fibers can actually be stretched up to 150% of their relaxed length without breaking. That's quite a bit. And they're always able to return to their original shape after being stretched. There's also reticular fibers in another type of tissue that are made of collagen. They provide a stroma or a framework for a lot of your lymphatic organs. Your spleen, your lymph nodes are all going to have reticular fibers. That's where you're going to see it. So here's a nice electron micrograph. I love to look at these because you get really good views of what you're really looking at. So you can see these collagen fibers versus these smaller elastic fibers. Kind of give you a different idea of what you are looking at. So this is all the different types of connective tissue we're going to go through. It's quite a bit. So let's get started. We have two different types of embryonic connective tissue. So these are found in either the embryo or the fetus, and they are going to develop into all of the different types of connective tissue we have in the body. Mesenchyme. Mesenchyme you'll hear about in Anatomy 2, and we'll probably mention it in Anatomy 1 some more. This is in the embryo. The embryo is the first 8 weeks after fertilization. After those first 8 weeks, it is known as the fetus. And in the fetus, we have mucoid connective tissue, and that is, again, after 8 weeks on. So this mesenchyme in that embryo, that developing baby, This mesenchyme can differentiate into just about every type of connective tissue, but it's found mostly under the skin, so bones that are developing, connective tissues, blood vessels. So it forms almost all types of connective tissue. Then we have mucoid. This is in that umbilical cord. That's where that's the main place you're gonna see mucoid connective tissue. So you'll hear it mentioned again in Anatomy 2 when you get into the reproductive and development chapters. And it provides that main support. Let's get into the main types of connective tissue. They're put into different categories. So we have loose connective tissue. Loose means it's going to be loosely arranged. So we're going to have a lot of ground substance. You're going to see a lot of ground substance or white area around it. So the first kind is areolar. Is areolar connective tissue. We're going to have collagen fibers. We're going to have elastic fibers. We could even have some reticular fibers found throughout. You're going to see all of these different types of cells. Lots of different types. And then that ground substance can be made of any of those different types of ground substances that I mentioned before. What's interesting thing about areolar connective tissue, it is found in and around almost every single type of tissue in the body. Areolar connective tissue, hint, hint, test question, is known as packing material. It helps to kind of hold, like fill in spaces. Any place like between an organ where there would otherwise not be anything, there's that areolar connective tissue packed in there to help cushion, support, to hold things in place. So it provides that strength. It's got elastic fibers, it's got collagen fibers, so it's got that elasticity, that strength from those collagen fibers, and it provides that support because it's holding things in place. So all of the really light pink in this picture specifically, the very light pink, is ground substance. So that's a lot of ground substance in there. These darker pink fibers here, that was weird, through here, those are collagen fibers. Those darker fibers here that I'm coloring in blue, those are elastic fibers. So that's what helps that tissue to kind of stretch. We see the nuclei here of some of these different cells. Those are fibroblasts. Those are the cells that are making and maintaining this areolar connective tissue. Should be a mast cell. Yeah. Just double checking. I was making sure because I was like, this is a mast cell. Even this here. You see all the little dots inside of the cell? That is substances that get released out when that tissue gets damaged to help bring your immune system to the area, but it causes that inflammatory response as well. This picture is found in your skin specifically, but this type of tissue with this kind of makeup looking exactly like this is found just about everywhere in the body. Adipose tissue, aka fat cells. Whoops. Those fat cells, their main job is storage. If we look at these cells, they look like big white bubbles. And the interesting thing with adipose cells, their nucleus is always pushed to the outside because so much of that cell is used for storage that that nucleus gets pushed out to the end, outside edge. So where do we have fat cells? It's in that areolar connective tissue. It's around your heart, around your kidneys, protecting. Yellow bone marrow is made of fat cells. Around your eyeball, again, protecting. It can pad around some of your joints. We have certain fat pads. We have fat pad by our elbow and our knees. So when you fall down onto your knees, yes, it's painful, but you're falling onto fat pads. They are protecting your knees somewhat, even though it does get painful. So all this fat is reducing heat loss. It's an energy reserve because it's storing those fat cells, those triglycerides, those types of fats. We can use that to make energy. It also supports and protects certain organs. We said the heart, the kidneys, the eyeballs. We're protecting those organs. We don't want anything to happen to them. We have BAT is for brown adipose tissue. This is found in very high amounts, especially in infants. Adults have a very small amount of this brown adipose tissue, but it's working to generate heat to help maintain that body temperature. Here's an interesting part. Adipose cells can make stem cells. They can use it to make remake damaged tissues. So when you look at fat cells, adipose cells, I gotta stop calling them fat cells because we need to name them as adipose cells. They're just big white bubbles with the little pink nucleus at the outside. But they're your main storage site for extra fats, extra carbohydrates, extra proteins. Those carbohydrates and proteins get turned into fats and then stored in fat cells until we need them. We can break down or take this stuff, what we've stored in these fat cells, we can take it out and use it for energy if we need to. Reticular connective tissue. Reticular, we mentioned, was in most lymphatic tissue. So it forms this stroma or framework. So liver, spleen, lymph nodes, even your red bone marrow, reticular lamina, which is one of the layers in your skin. To me, this almost looks like leaves or flowers or something on a tree. It's almost what this looks like to me. Because there's these little pink dots surrounding what could look like tree branches. In this picture, there's some other ones. We'll look at other ones and we'll look at pictures of this in lab as well, or slides of this in lab. But this is where, to me, this picture specifically, that is what this reticular connective tissue looks like. So let's look at the dense connective tissue. Dense means there's a lot more fibers than that loose. It's very tightly packed, and it doesn't have as many cells, those fibroblasts. There's not as many of those. So here is dense, regular connective tissue. It is regular because these fibers, this is collagen. These collagen fibers, these pink fibers, are lined up in nice, neat rows. That's what makes it regular. So they're nice, neat rows. Tendons and ligaments is where you're going to find these. So tendons connect muscle to bone. Ligaments hold bone to bone. We'll go through some of these when we get to the bones and the joints chapters later on. But that's where we're going to find this. This is why you sprain an ankle, it takes a long time to heal because collagen fibers don't repair themselves very well. So it's very slow process because there's also not a lot of those fibroblasts in the area. And those collagen fibers, they're not living. They're not living, they can't repair themselves. So, but they do provide attachment sites, very strong attachment sites. But these fibers are in nice, neat rows. And if you notice, you don't really see any nuclei around, especially in this picture. You really don't see any nuclei around. Here's one they're showing that really dark color is a nucleus from a fibroblast, but they're very far and few between. That is because this and a tissue later on gets mixed up. So I'm trying to separate one from the next. Okay, we said dense regular had fibers in nice, neat rows. Well, here is dense irregular. Again, there's those lots and lots of collagen fibers, but here's the thing. These collagen fibers are going multiple different directions. They're not in those nice, neat rows. They are irregularly arranged. So they're kind of all over the place. Where are we going to see these? Your fascia, your layers in your skin. That's where this slide is from. Your bones, cartilage, capsules that wrap around organs, and even your heart valves. So there's collagen fibers. Tissues are just going multiple different directions. Some of them are going that longitudinal, that long shape. Other ones look like they're jumping right out at you. Then we have elastic connective tissue. This elastic connective tissue is mostly elastic fibers. That's all you can see. So let's look. This is in the aorta, the main blood vessel that comes off of the heart. From here to here, those are all elastic fibers in nice, neat rows. There are just lots of these elastic fibers that are going across. They're kind of not straight. They're nice and jumbled up. So these elastic fibers, they can stretch. So every time blood gets pumped out of your heart, that aorta is going to stretch. When that aorta stretches, those elastic fibers allow that aorta to stretch and come back to its normal shape. Cartilage is another type of connective tissue. In the connective tissue we were looking at before, they have fibroblasts. In cartilage, these cells are called chondrocytes. Chondro means cartilage. So we're going to have these chondrocytes or cartilage cells in what are known as lacunae. Lacunae are these little kind of divots down in that tissue where these cells are going to live. Maybe one, maybe more than one in that area. Kind of looks like a smiley face, but this is the little tiny divots in this tissue where these cells are going to sit, and they're going to monitor the tissues around it. Cartilage is avascular, so it has no blood supply. That's why if you've ever damaged any cartilage, it doesn't heal very well. But cartilage resists stretching, squeezing, compressing, or shearing, which is things moving in opposite directions, these different forces. All of our bones start out as cartilage before they calcify over. Cartilage grows in this oppositional growth. So they grow at the outer surface of that tissue. So let's look at some of these. We'll go into oppositional growth more when we get to the bone chapter. Hyaline cartilage. Hyaline cartilage is the most common or most abundant type of cartilage in the body. All of your bones came from hyaline cartilage. It still lines the ends of a lot of your bones. Part of your nose, larynx, trachea, bronchi, which are in your lungs, those bronchial tubes in your lungs, are made of hyaline cartilage. So in hyaline cartilage, we kind of look at this picture over here. You're going to see a lot of ground substance, pinks, purples. That's that cartilage. Then you're going to see in hyaline cartilage, these cells do not pick up color. These cells tend to stay more white. The nucleus will pick up color, but the rest of the cell will not. And you could see a single cell together. You could see cells grouped. Where these cells are sitting are those little lacunae, that little divot down into that tissue, and there's cells living in there that are monitoring the tissues. Those are those chondrocytes. In hyaline cartilage specifically, these cells really don't pick up color. That's to kind of help to differentiate the different types of tissue. Next one, fibrocartilage. This isn't the best picture. I've got some other ones that we'll look at in lab. But fibrocartilage, what makes it different from this hyaline cartilage is it has collagen fibers. Why? We want it to be very strong. And that rigidity. Your pubic symphysis in the front of your pelvis is made of this fibrocartilage. Intervertebral discs. So between the bones of your back, there's these discs. They're made of this fibrocartilage. This is where this picture is. These are the bones that make up your back right here. This one of these, and here's this disc between it. So turning, jumping, bending, these discs allow your back to move in multiple different directions without damage. Menisci, these are in your knees. They're helping to kind of cushion your knees and help the two main bones that form your knees to actually fit together well. And so I say this isn't the best picture because you can't see those chondrocytes really well. We'll look at some other ones in lab, and those are the ones that I will test you on. But there's lots of collagen fibers found throughout here. The drawing is better than the actual slide in here. But there's lots of collagen fibers found throughout here. And then there's these individual cells or groups of cells in these lacunae. In fibrocartilage, these cells do tend to pick up more color than in this hyaline cartilage. Our last type of cartilage, elastic cartilage. again, we have these chondrocytes here. Like a different color since this is blue. We have these chondrocytes. But what makes this different is in this ground substance between all these cells, we have lots of elastic fibers. So where do we have this? Your ear, part of your ear that sticks out off of your head. Even the tubes, auditory tubes, are made of elastic cartilage. Even the epiglottis, what I mentioned before, that moves up and down in your throat that allows you to swallow and stuff to actually go down the esophagus, not the trachea, the food pipe, not the windpipe. That elasticity, you can pull on the ear and it stretches a little bit because it's got elastic fibers in it. Your bone is also a connective tissue. Just like cartilage had that lacunae, so does bone. Bone has lamellae. The best way to describe lamellae, think of tree rings. There's canaliculi, these little canals where cells can talk to each other. Cartilage, we had chondrocytes. Bone, we have osteocytes, osteo for bone. There's two different types of bone. There's that compact bone and there's spongy bone. Spongy bone does not have osteons, which are those concentric circles. They have what are known as trabeculae. We'll go into more detail about it when we get to Chapter 6, bone tissue. So here is compact bone. In this compact bone, you kind of come down and look at it here, you can see all of these different concentric rings. These rings kind of make it look like a tree rings. That's why I said compact bone, those lamellae are tree rings. Those tree rings is what makes this compact bone. All of these little kind of darker dots here, these darker dots, those are those osteocytes. Those osteocytes are what make up what looks like those many different rings. And this makes up a large portion of our bones, or these compact bones here. So pretty much every bone in your body has compact bone in it. So it is used to support your skeleton, your framework of your body. It protects. Storage. We have that yellow fat stored in our bones. We also make blood. We make blood cells in our bones and that red bone marrow, that yellow bone marrow, that red bone marrow. Your blood is also a connective tissue. So we have different cells within our blood, but your blood is the only connective tissue that is considered a liquid. That plasma is the liquid portion of it. So within your blood, we have erythrocytes, or those red blood cells. We have leukocytes, or white blood cells, your immune cells. And then we have thrombocytes, or platelets. Platelets help to clot your blood when a blood vessel's been broken. So let's look at blood here. So within blood, you see all of these little red circles. Those are all of your red blood cells. Your red blood cells do not have a nucleus when they are out in circulation. They have a nucleus when they're developing. They get rid of their nucleus before they go out into circulate around your body and do their job. Red blood cells are kind of this biconcave disc. So they're kind of showing you from one side, but they're biconcave, so they kind of go both directions. They cave in on both sides. That's why the center of it kind of looks lighter than the outside. And then we have white blood cells. We have 5 different types of white blood cells, so they're all going to be different shapes. They're going to stain different colors, but they're usually larger than the white bloods or the red blood cells. Some of them can have a single nucleus, some of them can have a long chain nucleus. You don't need to worry about identifying the different white blood cells in this class. You will do that when you get to anatomy 2. So for this class, all you need to be able to identify is that this is blood. That's as far as we'll take it in this class. In anatomy 2, you will go into a lot more detail about all of these different cells, what they do, and have to be able to identify each of the different cells. So let's go into membranes, because a lot of our membranes are either made of endothelial cells or they can be made of endothelial with connective tissue with it. So a membrane, as we'll hit this in anatomy 1 and anatomy 2, is a flat sheet that's going to cover or line something. So let's look at the first one. Mucous membrane. Mucus means it's somewhere that's going to be wet or moist. So it's going to line something that's going to open to the outside, like your mouth. Your mouth is a mucous membrane. Your entire digestive canal is a mucous membrane. Your respiratory tract is because it has access to the outside. That genital tract and that urinary tract, those are all different mucous membranes because they have access to the outside. So these mucous membranes need to have different defense systems to protect you. They've got tight junctions because we don't want something to get through and inside of our system that should not be there. Those goblet cells are helping to make mucus to help trap different particles and prevent those cavities from drying out. So there's different types of tissues depending on where it's at. Like the small intestine has a non-ciliated simple columnar epithelium, while your airways have that ciliated pseudostratified columnar epithelium. Where they're at is just going to depend, and what kind of job that tissue needs to do is going to determine what type of tissue is found there. Most mucous membranes have this lamina propria, which is that connective tissue underneath. Most of the time, it's that areolar connective tissue that's helping to support the epithelium above it. Again, we said epithelial cells do not have blood supply. Connective tissue does. So these mucous membranes get all of their oxygen, get rid of their carbon dioxide, pick up all of their nutrients that they need to provide to do their different functions from the connective tissue underneath. So that's where that oxygen and nutrients diffuse into the epithelial cells, and waste products, carbon dioxide, go the opposite direction. We have serous membranes. And this is what lines something that does not open to the outside. So in here, we're going to have a parietal layer that's going to face the outside. You're going to hear these words a lot in this class and the next one. And the visceral. The visceral layer goes directly on top of that specific organ. So we're going to see both sides of those. And then in between the two layers is going to have this serous fluid to help kind of lubricate between. Depending on where it's located, it's going to have a specific name. Pleura is for lungs. So we have a visceral and a parietal pleura around our lungs. We have a visceral and parietal pericardium around our heart. We have a visceral and a parietal peritoneum around our entire abdominal contents. All of the organs in our abdomen are lined with this parietal peritoneum and visceral peritoneum. So these words are going to come back to haunt you in Anatomy 2. So learning them now will help you remember them later. Then we have our cutaneous membrane. Our only cutaneous membrane is your skin. It is made of different layers, which we'll go over in Chapter 5, the epidermis and the dermis. Your skin is keratinized, stratified squamous epithelium. Those keratin, that protein is helping to protect your skin. We'll go into more detail in the next chapter about the epidermis, that top layer of your skin, and then that dermis, which is connective tissue underneath, 2 different types even. We'll go into a lot more detail about all of that in the next chapter. Another membrane, synovial membranes. We'll talk about this more when we get to joints, but synovial membranes wrap around all of your joints that you can move. Any joint that you can move around has a synovial membrane around it. Has cells that are known as synoviocytes that make synovial fluid. This fluid helps your joints move smoothly. So these are just some of those different examples. A mucous membrane, we're going to have those goblet cells because they need to be able to secrete out mucus to lubricate. Serous membrane, this is wrapping around the outside of that organ. So that pleura around those lungs, that visceral and parietal layer around the lungs. That cutaneous membrane is your skin. I'm pretty sure that's a test question too. Then synovial membranes. This is a good example because you see these tissues here that is wrapping around this joint. And then we have that synovial fluid on the inside that is helping to protect that joint. We only have 2 more types of tissues to go through. Muscular tissue and nervous tissue. I know it's a lot, but we're on to the last 2. So, muscle cells. Muscle cells are known as myocytes. We'll talk about this again in pretty sure chapter 10 when we get to muscles. They use ATP for energy. And we have 3 different types. I mentioned skeletal, I mentioned cardiac. We also have a connective or a muscular tissue that is known as smooth muscle. So let's look at these. Skeletal muscle. This is the one that everybody knows about already. Should know because it moves you around. Skeletal muscle are these long cells here. This is skeletal muscle. This is one skeletal muscle cell. So when you look into skeletal muscle, you're going to see these lines. These are striations. Skeletal muscle has these nice, neat striations in nice, neat rows. They're lined up nice and neat here. There's a blood vessel going through this. That's where this is here. And I think there's one right here even. Blood vessel going through, but this is skeletal muscle. They have these really nice, neat striations, and these cells are very long. Hint, hint, when identifying. They are usually attached to bones by tendons. They help you move. They maintain your posture. Whatever position you're sitting in right now, you've got muscles holding you in that posture. Heat production. Every time a muscle contracts, it generates heat as a byproduct. That is why when you're cold, you shiver. Shivering is generating heat to warm you up. Then protection. They're protecting your bones underneath. Skeletal muscle is voluntary, meaning you have control over what your muscles are doing. We'll go into more detail about it in the muscle chapter, but I'm just mentioning it now so when you hear it again, it kind of helps to ring a bell. Cardiac muscle. This is only found in the heart. Cardiac for heart. The difference in cardiac muscle, that's what I was looking for, they have what are known as intercalated discs that are made of desmosomes and gap junctions. So let's look at this for a second. This cardiac muscle, this dark line here, 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 all over, those are intercalated discs. Cardiac muscle cells are shorter than skeletal muscle. So when you look at a skeletal muscle, you're not going to see the end of one muscle cell, the start of the next muscle cell. You'll just see lots of these muscle cells in nice, neat rows. Cardiac muscle, you're going to see these intercalated discs. That is the start of one muscle cell and the end of another. Cardiac muscle cell, this picture doesn't show it as well, but they do branch. So this one cell here has all of these different branches to it. Same with the one next to it. It has this one branch, one cell that has multiple branches to it. So that's another thing that makes cardiac muscle different. These gap junctions. Cardiac muscle is involuntary. We cannot control it. We cannot tell our heart to beat 65 times per minute. We cannot tell our brain to do that. Can't tell our heart to do that. That's why it is involuntary. The last type of muscle tissue, smooth muscle tissue. Remember how I said dense, regular connective tissue, how you don't see very many nuclei? This is the type of tissue that I am saying that because of. Whoops. With smooth muscle, you look at this picture here, this slide, you see lots of pink cells. These cells are technically in this fusiform kind of shape. The nucleus in the middle, my bad cell. There's another drawing of it with the nucleus in the middle. So the big difference here with smooth muscle is you're going to see a lot of nuclei. You're going to see cells in nice, neat rows, but you're going to see a lot of nuclei. That's what makes this different than that dense, regular connective tissue that is all collagen, mostly collagen fibers. So we're going to see this, the iris of your eye, that's the colored portion of your eye. There's muscles in there that's changing the size of that pupil in the middle of your eye. Blood vessels, airways in the lungs, your stomach, intestines, gallbladder, urinary bladder, the uterus. With smooth muscle, it's smooth because it doesn't have those nice, neat lines, those striations that you saw. Technically, that's why I said this picture is not the best, but this drawing, you can see cardiac muscle also has those striations, all those nice, neat lines. Skeletal muscle has all those nice, neat lines. They're striated. Smooth muscle is not. That's why it's smooth. Smooth muscle is also involuntary because smooth muscle helps food move through the digestive tract, changes the size of your blood vessels and your airways. We can't tell our digestive tract how fast to move something through or how slow to move something through. So we don't have control over that. The only muscle tissue we have control over is that skeletal muscle. And to our last type of tissue, nervous tissue. The main cell we're going to look at today is known as a neuron. This is the type of cell that sends information from your brain to your muscles so you can pick something up off the table, so you can go walk out of the room, so you can write something down. This is also the same type of cells that when somebody taps you on the shoulder, you feel it. It sends that brain information up to your brain, so it even knows where somebody's touching you, so you can turn to that direction to talk to somebody. Neurons send what are known as action potentials. That is the electrical signals that they use to communicate, to talk to each other, to talk to your muscles, to talk to your glands, or to send that information up to your brain. So here is all we need to look at now for nervous tissue. We'll go into more detail on it later. But this darkly colored cell here, that is a neuron. This is one type of neuron. In this neuron, we have a cell body. All of these little branches coming off are known as dendrites, sorry. Those are dendrites that are coming off. And then we have a very long axon on the other side. But for now, we'll go into a lot more detail about this in chapter 12. I think it is when we get to the nervous system. For now, if you see this picture, all you need to know is that is nervous tissue or a neuron. If you put either one of those down, that's all you need to know. So I talked about neurons, nervous tissue being able to send electrical signals. They are electrically excitable. But neurons aren't the only ones. Muscle cells are also the other type of cell that is electrically excitable. Neurons tell your muscle to contract by using these electrical action potentials to communicate with each other. So let's go into a little bit of tissue repair here. Our body works to maintain that homeostasis, that balance, its happy place where it likes to be. So we are going to repair tissues. We need to, when cells get worn out, when they're damaged, or when they die, we need to replace them. That stroma, that framework, most of our cells replace themselves through dividing, that cell division, that mitosis. Underneath any of our epithelial cells, we're always going to have that supporting connective tissue. And then we have those stem cells. Stem cells are undifferentiated cells. They can divide and create new cells. We have a lot of different types of stem cells in our body. When we get to the different chapters that talk about them, we'll go into detail about them. Just kind of, again, mentioning them here because they will come back. I mentioned before that any scars on your body, those are from connective tissue that didn't repair itself well. We do have some connective tissue that can repair itself. Bone, because bone has a very large blood supply. If you have ever broken a bone before, that area turns very purple because there's a lot of blood vessels that are going to that bone to maintain that bone. So there's a lot of blood supply to our bones that are helping to maintain our bones. They're helping to fix broken bones. Cartilage, on the other hand, does not have blood supply, so it's not going to repair itself very well. It doesn't do a good job. Muscle tissue. Muscle tissue is not very good at repairing itself either. When we get to the muscle section, we'll kind of talk about it, but these stem cells for muscle are called satellite cells. Smooth muscle can repair itself the best. smooth muscle, skeletal muscle, and then cardiac. Cardiac has the least regenerative properties. That's why when someone has a heart attack, those cells are dying and scar tissue is being formed in that area instead. That's why that heart never really works the same after a heart attack. If those cells lose oxygen for long enough, they die. But smooth, out of all of our different muscle cells, smooth muscle is the best, then skeletal muscle, then cardiac. Last question. Nervous tissue. Those neurons, especially in the brain and the spinal cord, they cannot replace themselves. Nerves that go to your muscles, nerves that let you feel something, they can regenerate themselves depending on where the damage is. We'll go into how nervous tissue regenerates itself in the nervous system. But there is some stem cells in the brain, but those cells really don't go through mitosis. They don't replace themselves when damaged. So when cells need to replace themselves, it's going to depend on if there's stem cells available to help replace. Fibroblasts, they can actively repair, but the process, they will lay down new connective tissue when there's damage. But the problem is they're going to form scar tissue or fibrosis. You'll form some of this granulation tissue. So in a wound or surgical incision, that's where we get scar tissue that is forming. The epithelial cells can replace themselves no problem. It's the connective tissue underneath that is forming that scar tissue. Wound dissonance. Those of you going into nursing, you will hear this a lot. That is when there's a partial or a complete separation of those outer layers. So surgical incision will form a wound dissonance. When we get to, might be the nervous system, there's different areas within this section we'll talk about what happens if you put where incisions are on how they heal. Somebody puts in sutures that are too far apart, staples that are too far apart. You put something too close to the ends of those incisions, too much pressure, say on your stomach, and then that wound opens back up. If sutures or staples are removed too soon, that can reseparate and open. There's always going to be something that besides just the general cell division for healing. Your age. Every chapter from here on out, we're going to talk about what happens to that system as you get older. It's not fun. Your nutrition. Are you taking in the right nutrients to help heal? And then your blood circulation. Is there blood going to that area? You need enough proteins. We talked about cells, the different parts of the cell membrane, different parts within the cells. You need enough protein in your diet for your cells to make what they need. Vitamins, vitamin C helps collagen formation. If you're not getting enough vitamin C, you're not getting enough collagen made. You need oxygen, nutrients, defense cells. We need to be able to remove extra fluid around cells, debris. All of this stuff can affect how the wound is going to heal. And here's the first time I'll talk about aging. So, as we get older, those epithelial cells get thinner. Connective tissues gets more fragile. As you start to lose elastic tissue, elastic fibers, collagen, wrinkles are going to form. Your blood vessels bump into something, you can bruise a lot easier because those blood vessels, that epithelial cells, are getting thinner. You lose your bone density if you're not taking care of your body, exercising, moderate weightlifting. You start losing your bone and muscle density at the age of 30. Because you're losing that bone density, your bones can break easier. Joint pain. You have all kinds of joint problems. As I mentioned with bones, skeletal muscle your strength starts to decline at the age of 30. You don't notice it until in your 60s usually, but you start to lose that if you don't use it. Your heart doesn't pump as efficiently. That smooth muscle doesn't work as well. The older you take, or the older you are, the slower your tissues repair themselves. Here's the interesting thing. They do surgeries on a fetus, and because they still have all that embryologic connective tissue, fetuses don't get scars. You don't even know that a fetus has had surgery on it while it was in utero, which is kind of cool. Glucose, that sugar in your blood, is going to play a role in aging. As you get older, your body doesn't know what to do with glucose sometimes. So we can put glucose with proteins, which can cause irreversible damage. As more of this glucose gets added to proteins, your skin loses that elasticity. Your tissues, all of your tissues, not just your skin, everything ages. Arterial walls aren't as flexible as they used to be, so it's harder to pump blood through. That elastin doesn't stretch as well. It gets thicker, so it's harder to stretch. Calcium can get put into the walls of blood vessels, causing atherosclerosis. Your epithelial cells can cause problems, peptic ulcers. This is holes in tissues, holes in your stomach, hole in your small intestine. You have autoimmune disorders. Autoimmune is when your own immune system is attacking itself. Rheumatoid arthritis is the best example because rheumatoid arthritis attacks those synovial membranes, those that we had mentioned that wraps around every joint that moves. The fingers are usually the first ones to be affected by this, but your immune system is attacking those joints so they don't work very well. Another one, lupus. Lupus is where your immune system is attacking connective tissue. It is mostly seen in non-white women of childbearing age. It can act up. It can go into remission. About 1 in 2,000 females have lupus. We don't know, it has some genetic cause to it, environmental, what you're exposed to. Hormones can play a factor. There's a lot of things that play into it, but these people tend to have painful joints, fevers. fatigue, ulcers, enlarged lymph nodes. Their spleen can get enlarged, sensitive to light. They lose a lot amount of hair, anorexia. In medical terms, anorexia just means they don't have an appetite. They can't eat. It's not that they're starving themselves to look skinny. It's just that they don't eat because they don't have that appetite there. These people tend to have this like butterfly rash across their face, kind of goes across their nose and their cheeks. They can have different skin lesions. They can have kidney problems, liver, spleen, lungs, heart, brain, and gastrointestinal tract problems. There is no cure. There's right now there's no cure for pretty much any autoimmune disease. All they can do is support it. Try to find ways to help prevent it from getting worse and kind of maintain things where they're at. So that is everything on chapter 4, tissues. Thank you very much for listening. Bye.